Kids nowadays are being raised in a completely different world than, for instance, their parents. But what has happened to this first generation of always being online as an effect of new technologies?
There are plenty of proud parents sharing their infants' touchscreen skills on YouTube.
Show me Word World.
Okay. Where you go?
Oh,
Okay. Right there.
good job.
I think one of the things that has happened to the first generation of kids to grow up always being online, which by the way are my kids. They have never experienced dial-up or anything like that. They've always had always on. And what I've seen is they have a global awareness that was not present in my generation. They really feel as if this is one world. They also feel as if they are always connected to everyone else. There is a feeling of being connected that I did not have in my generation. And I think the third thing is that there is a sense of movement forward, the sense of going somewhere, of maybe you might call it progress, that I think was not present in previous generations.
So new technologies definitely has an impact on kids. But what kind of impact do they have on older kids or teenagers?
There are now people in their mid to getting on to advanced teens who have never known, obviously, a world without the web. In fact, there may be 20-year-olds who've never known anything about that. Have they developed strange thumbs? Do they have peculiar ways of talking and listening? Do their eyes glaze over when they have to concentrate for more than 30 seconds? No, I don't believe any of that. I'm not particularly negative or pessimistic about the social qualities, the linguistic qualities, the concentration qualities of Generation Web, as they're called. I honestly believe that if you were to go back into the 1920s and take an ordinary, semi-educated 15-year-old and place him next to an ordinary, semi-educated 15-year-old now, you would find the one now knows more, understands more, is more socially confident, is more aware of the rest of the world, is more able and more adept at research, may not be able to say their 9 times table as fluently or repeat amo amasamata mamasamati amant. They may not be able to do that. Is that such a great loss to an old-fashioned person like me? I'd love to think people could do both, but let's get real about this. Connection is what humans crave. It's what we are all about. It's something that separates us from animals. It even comes before the fact that we have language, because the language is an example of a, if you like, a neural technology we have created to answer this need for connection. We are the social animal par excellence, or by devilry, if you like, if not necessarily excellence. We are constantly in need of connecting with people for friendship, love, sex, knowledge, growth, enmity, territoriality, all the imperatives that drive us as human beings. And we've created villages and towns to help us do that, and roads, and now we've created something else that allows us to do it even more. Where people make their fundamental error, who criticize all this and think it's a danger and that it's reducing our capacity to act as proper human beings, is they think it's all this. You either sit in front of a screen of some kind, or tapping away all your life, going lol, and being childish and not writing in proper English sentences, or you sit in an old-fashioned study with books and you read properly and you engage properly and you go for walks. Well, I do both. And most people do both. It is not one or the other. I have made quite a lot of online friends. I don't even know what gender some of them are. They're people I chat with, either personal direct messaging in forums and Twitter and so on. Some of whom I think are very young, you can sort of tell they are, and who astonish me occasionally with their knowledge of literature. In fact, I was having a conversation just the other day with one who was talking to me about Evelyn Waugh. And I think she's 12. And she seems to have read every book that Evelyn Waugh ever wrote, and have a very intelligent view of this great novelist. And I almost wanted to say, but how would someone who's 12 like you ever have read these books? And I think, what am I saying? Of course they might have done, and spend a lot of their time on a forum as well. It's not, the two are not mutually exclusive.
So, as kids get older, they become able to go online. But how is their behavior online? Is it different than their normal behavior?
It's not so much that they're behaving differently as much as that we have a sense of visibility that we've never seen before. So we're used to being able to see a certain group of kids in certain places, right? The mall, we can see kids hanging out with their friends that way. But as adults, we don't typically have a really good sense of all the kids and a good sense of where they are and what they're doing when they're with their friends. What's going on online is, in many ways, it's youth space. So they're there, they're goofing around as though they're there just with their friends. And so what ends up happening is you can get a sense of what's going on really in broad sweeps. And it isn't just the kids like the kids in your community, but the kids who are in different communities all around the world with all sorts of different ideas of what is normative behavior, right? And that what is normal, what is common really differs. And so we see these behaviors online and we're like, oh my gosh, it's radically different today than it ever was before. It's not really.
Well, I was going to ask that actually. How different is it from like when I was a kid, I'd come to the mall and I'd do stuff at the mall or I'd go to the movie theater or whatever. Right. How different is it?
Think about what happens when you were doing that with your friends, right? You were there, you were joking around, you were gossiping, you were flirting, you were kind of consuming culture and consuming merchandise, but it was part of this all-encompassing social experience. The same thing is actually happening fully online, right? So all of those everyday practices, the gossip, the flirting, the joking around, that's taking place online. And it's taking place online with the same kinds of friends that took place in the mall, right? You met up with all the kids at school, but you also saw the kids at the neighboring school, and you're like, hey, who are you? What's that about? That same thing is where we're seeing it play out. So young people who are engaged online, they're primarily engaged with the people they already know. They're friends from school, they're friends from after-school activities, they're friends from around the community.
We're going to talk to you today about internet safety. We're going to give you our top 4 things that you absolutely need to know about internet safety.
You know, you put something up on, I don't know, you put something up on Facebook, like a social networking site, or you put something on MySpace or any of these spaces, and it's there. It's there for life. So are there ways that the kids are starting to protect themselves? How do they stop what they're putting up there?
Well, they're not going to stop what they put up there because the trick with online materials is everything is persistent by its nature, right? That's one of the powers of the internet. And we think of it really as a useful affordance, right? Because if something is persistent, that means you can get access to it at a different time, right? That's the opportunity for asynchronicity. But it's also how this material is available 10, 15, 20 years later. And right now we're in that moment of transition, that point of absolute confusion, the uncertainty of, what does it mean that you have everything up there? Down the road, it just becomes the way things are, and it's interesting to see the individuals for whom that's already part of their story. And that's the power of the early adopters, right? So I think about it, I've been blogging since, 1997. That's a really long time at this point. And sure, you can go back and you can read all sorts of things about me as a teenager, working out all sorts of issues. Hopefully you won't. But more importantly, it's about constantly moving forward. And so if someone wants to engage with that level of stalking and see my teenagedom, they can. But you have to read it in the light of the whole shift. And so I think for the teenagers today, they're going to be living out their teenage lives in this very persistent, very searchable manner. But 10, 15 years from now, it's going to be part of a longer trajectory, and the people are going to be looking at the things they're doing as 20-somethings. And sure, we look back and go, oh, that was stupid what I did when I was, 14. And it was. It always was. But when you have this cultural element where everybody's got this track record, it's not going to be as shocking as it is right now for the people who are, learning that and figuring it out.
Tip 2, don't put personal information online. 73% of teens and 68% of young adults are on social networking sites. Of those people, roughly half post personal information, phone numbers, addresses, emails. Don't do that. If you do, it leaves you open for attacks from either cyberbullies or just some weird folks who want to take advantage of you. Do yourself.
The one thing that keeps coming up is this idea of the exchange of private information. How are kids exchanging or using private information as currency in a different way than perhaps adults are using private information as currency?
Well, again, what constitutes private information, right? From an adult's perspective, it's identifying information is their absolute fear, right? The idea that it's your name, your address, your phone number, anything that will identify you. And this has to do with the idea of physical risk. But for young people, it's about the, all right, fine, you can call me by my name. Why is that a big deal? It's more about the things that make you vulnerable. And so when we think about privacy and private information, it's really a question of vulnerability. And so from adult perspective, we're really concerned about physical vulnerabilities and increasingly about psychological vulnerabilities. And for a lot of young people, it's about social vulnerabilities. So, how do I make certain that I don't get teased, harassed, bullied because of the things that I make available out there? How do I make certain that what I put out there makes me seem cool and not lame? How do I balance that? So the social vulnerability is the privacy fight for young people. The physical and psychological is the fight for parents. And so we see these two constantly at odds, because part of putting things out in public is to achieve status, you need to actually make yourself vulnerable at a certain level. And how do you actually do that in a way that balances the risks and the benefits?
All this work on social media.
Social media has made it so high school never ends.
Ironically, the quest for likes doesn't make you likable. It's all about seeking status.
How much our posts make us seem influential and how much they're visible. This is a problem.
People who crave likes lose some of their grip on reality.
They're overly influenced by other people's disingenuous and false posts.
The bottom line?
If you weren't popular in high school, you can join about 95% of people who feel the exact same way.
So the popular kids are using the technologies to try to maintain and reinforce popularity in very particular ways. And that's where we see social status becoming really critical. So it's no longer the Nikes that are the particular status markers. It's the way of actually maintaining certain kinds of friendships and getting certain kinds of responses from certain celebrities. All of that play goes on. We also see marginalized kids who were desperately seeking some sort of support, and were often at loss, out in more traditional senses of schools or whatnot, finding a community online. And this is one of the more powerful narratives of the internet, right? Your queer kids who can actually find people like them, who can support them. They're much more willing to be public in a traditional sense because they're desperate for somebody who might be like them. For the popular kid, it's much more about being public to the school, people who will give them credit, that will give them status. And so we see these different groups contending with it differently. We also see the power of certain public figures, in negotiating with teenagers. So if you think about which teenagers are using Twitter in the earliest stages, a lot of it comes down to who's talking to celebrities. And this wasn't that different from when I was growing up, and the idea of writing to the new kids on the block, right, the boy band of the day, in the hopes that you would get a letter, in response, right, which was inevitably a form letter, was the possibility of reaching out and getting a response, feeling as though that person really existed and they really recognized your existence. Twitter is a modern day incarnation of that for a lot of the celebrity teenager relationships, right? Can I get validation from, Miley Cyrus, who's now left Twitter, or Demi Lovato, or any number of these particular celebs? The idea that maybe I can actually get to meet Shaquille O'Neal in person because he'll announce where he is, right? All of that possibility. So you see that as another component. So there's always these publics, and these publics keep coming back, but the same practices are there.